Tanse, my name is Jarrett Martineau. I'm Cree Dene from Frog Lake First Nation in Alberta, just on the border between Alberta and Saskatchewan and Canada. First of all, I just want to acknowledge the Lenni Lenape and other original peoples of this place. And I'm very grateful, very honored, and very humbled to be able to be here and share the stage with all these other wonderful people. I also want to give it up to our brother Clayton, who has been in a day-long, crazy series of transit mishaps trying to get from Ottawa to New York. I know our thoughts are with him. I wish he was here to be a part of this conversation, and maybe he'll come drumming down the aisle here right at the very end of the night. Yeah, singing Idle No More songs. There's a couple of things that I realized just since I've been up here, and I have a million slides, so I probably shouldn't give like a long-winded introduction before I get into the millions of slides, but there's a couple of things that I think are important that I really just realized since listening to the other speakers that are here. And one of them is the fact that we're having an event like this that I think even a few years ago we wouldn't really have been able to have. That there's a particular time that we're in that's about a real reemergence and a real reassertion of our people that's producing all of this new media, this new artistry, this new culture, which is amazing. I mean, and if you look at like Last Real Indians, the work that I've been doing, and the blogs, I mean, we're only talking about a few years here that you guys have been doing this work, and that we've all been doing this work. Not that it doesn't inherit the kind of long continuity of struggle and representation that our people have been, fighting against through colonial incursions since the time of first contact, but there's a particular energy that's happening right now, and I realized today that I was like, I just take for granted that you all are doing this, and we're all doing this work, and we're representing ourselves, and of course we should be doing that, and that's what our people have been doing for a long time, or at least trying to do, but now we're in a place where we can really do that for ourselves. So today, this is kind of I'm going to talk about remix, art, culture, through a kind of filter of political engagement and how we find ourselves in this particular moment in time. And to do that, I want to talk about a group called Tribe Called Red. How many in the room know about Tribe Called Red? Raise your hands, I can look out. Almost everybody, yeah. So I wish they could be here with us tonight. And this is a quote, I believe DJ Indian said this, but I'm going to just take this as a quote from all of them. After what happened in the last 100 years, the simple fact that we're here today is a political statement. As First Nations people, everything we do is political. And it's from an interview that they gave sometime last year that they decided to include in the liner notes of their most recent record, Nation to Nation. And I'm using Tribe Called Red as a kind of a bit of a framework for the talk that I'm going to give tonight, not only because they are as ubiquitous in Indian country as they are, but because they're a group that's really found a way to break out of the kind of confines of serving sort of only one really specific and localized audience and really find a huge audience for their work and their music. And in part, they've done that through the kind of work of remix that they've been able to incorporate. And I see this sort of current running through a lot of what's been said already tonight and through what I'm going to talk about tonight, specifically through music and through media production. And the quote from Tribe Called Red that I started with, to me, and this is a neat kind of pairing with a quote that's been referenced a lot in recent scholarship and in almost any native talk about artwork, which is from Louis Riel saying, "My people will sleep for 100 years, and when they awake, it will be the artists who give them back their spirit." And I don't know if he necessarily was anticipating that what that would be the electric powwow that Tribe Called Red have brought to us and to the dance floors. DJ Shub, DJ Indian, and Bear Witness playing here at the Art Gallery of Ontario, and you guys heard the music on the way in, and many of you are already familiar with what they're doing. A combination of, for the most part, powwow music, different forms of traditional music, often intertribals. They have access to a whole catalog of powwow and native artists called tribal spirit music that they're allowed to sample from at will. And in turn, they incorporate it obviously with electronic dance music in many different forms. And part of their own reciprocity with the work is to then gift the artists whose work that they remix back to a remix that they can then release with their own work. So it kind of is this like nice synergistic quality between the work that they make. But I want to talk specifically about this quote because I think it's a sort of an orienting frame for thinking about what's happening right now. We're coming to a time now where our community has become very strong over a short period of time, and we're starting to represent ourselves and be able to take control of our image. It's an exciting time. I mean, it is. But specifically, I want to pull from that 4 elements. This is what I think a lot of Indigenous media work is really seeking to do. It's about building community. It's about really asserting our strength. It's about taking charge of representation, which of course flows into different forms of control. And in the work that I do specifically, these are the kind of like fundamental elements of a lot of the work that guide both the academic work that I do, the political organizing work that I do, and the media work that I do. And this is really what inspired, I mean, not the quote directly, but these elements are really what inspired the creation of an Indigenous music site that we built called Revolutions Per Minute, rpm.fm. We launched the site in the summer of 2011, I think, at a time where there have been like piecemeal bits and pieces of Indigenous music sites out there, but not really a central space to promote the wide diversity of Indigenous music that's being made by artists across all different genres and from all over the world. And our tagline for the site is Indigenous Music Culture, both a riff on the idea of Indigenous music and Indigenous culture, but also this emergent space that we've seen happening, which is Indigenous music culture. It's this culture of us all making and creating together. So this is the website. We have a bunch of different Indigenous music news, downloads, interviews with artists, a podcast series that does interviews across a wide variety of geographic locations and also topics, a massive artist database. And one of the most interesting things for me has been, since we've had the site up, not only this like incredible growth of creativity among Indigenous musicians and artists who are finding our site, who are contributing their music to our site, who are enjoying the fact that we're featuring their work, but we're like rediscovering ourselves and really recognizing ourselves, and that was a big part of it. I wanted this site to be something that my pitch to artists joining up was an Indigenous music site that you wouldn't be embarrassed to be affiliated with, and everybody was like, oh, okay, I get it, yeah, I'm down, I get it, all right. Cool. So like it's a simple kind of a point, but there wasn't anything like that. And so we're like, we got to create this. We got to celebrate ourselves. So on the one hand, it's an inward-facing work that's about cultivating that relationship with one another, recognizing one another, and celebrating ourselves. And at the same time, saying to people that don't know that there's this wealth of creativity happening in our communities, look at all the crazy, amazing music being made by Indigenous artists that you had no idea existed. And we want to show you that. Yeah, you might have heard of Tribe Called Red. Did you know that there's 100 other artists doing work that's in a similar kind of vein? So really, just reiterating the point that I've made already, I see, and these are not to be sort of totalizing or trying to create a single model for what Indigenous media is or should be, but these are the work, I think these are really the essential elements of a lot of the work that we're doing across the variety of different platforms that we're working within. But there's a thing that always gets in the way of that. And there's a political reality that we are engaged with by virtue of being Indigenous peoples, asserting ourselves in the ways that we've been talking about, and I think that the previous panelists talked about as well. So everything that we do is political. Everything that we do is already informed by the fact that there's a background, and in many cases, a foreground of a political, a social, a cultural, a spiritual experience of being colonized people, of being dispossessed of our lands, of our territories, of our lifeways, of our forms of creativity, all the string of the long list of forms of social suffering experienced by our people in an ongoing way. So Indigenous media, Indigenous cultural production, Indigenous art and creativity is always a contestation of that. Even when not explicitly stated, it's always working in some capacity at addressing this constant reality that we're facing. It's working to address the reality of the need that we have to decolonize. And in part, I see the recent political emergence of our people through things like the I Don't Know More movement that if Clayton does make it through those doors, he can talk to in a little more depth and length. I've been involved in doing organizing with the movement and its various offshoots and permutations since it came about last winter, and I appreciate the words that Joss offered to us as a kind of framing for understanding that part of this political reality that was with our people, you can see some of the drummers there. I don't know how to work the pointer. Yeah, in there. Some drummers in the middle. That it was a political move. It is a political movement. It's also a deeply spiritual movement. It's also a cultural movement. It's bringing our songs and dances and our culture into spaces like the middle of a shopping mall on Boxing Day, interrupting the flow of capitalism in its most, overt spaces. And so Indigenous media is really working, and I think cutting across both cultural forms of expression and also political forms of expression is navigating this contested space. And Indigenous people, we always find ourselves at this intersection. And we're in the midst of holding this space in tension. On the one hand, of needing to resist these forces of incursion, these continued forces of dispossession, of racism, of appropriation, and so on. And on the other hand, what we're advocating for is the resurgence of our people, the resurgence of our nation, the resurgence of our ways, our forms of expression across all these different platforms. And so for me, one of the ways that I see us navigating that is with another version of the and I'm going to get to a little bit more of that comes out after. And that's through the idea of remix. And remix culture, I mean, in a sense, is sort of ubiquitous now. It permeates all of our, particularly social media, new media platforms in so many ways that you can just grab a song, rip the audio from a YouTube, make your own version, and put it back up again 3 seconds after it was released is a different point in terms of the kind of continuum and access to the tools and the platforms that we have. But I see Indigenous people particularly working with this idea of taking these pre-existing materials and combining them into new forms as being fundamental to our work of both resistance and asserting resurgence. It's a kind of a particular moment that we're in where we're trying to attack and counter all of these negative representations that have happened to us and do something with them, take them and transform them and make something new, create a new language out of it, while at the same time reaffirming those elements of our cultures that are central to who we are. So I just use this as a quick example, a great one. Sonny Asu, his piece Coast Salish, Enjoy Coast Salish Territory, which I love both for the fact that, I mean, it's taking an obvious logo that everybody in the world knows, but it's this sort of double-pointed thing of saying, you know, you're not acknowledging that you're on Coast Salish territory, and like you should be, and also you should be, you know, enjoying it. It's a pointed barb kind of back at the fact that there's a lack of recognition. And a great piece. And there are many artists that are working in various forms, and I would suggest that certainly some of the things that we've seen tonight, even in terms of fashion and then as it extends to politically, we're remixing narratives, we're remixing stories, right? Our world and our work of storytelling is in part about extending the concept of remix beyond just strictly the kind of aesthetic understanding. And in that respect, I think why it's deeply political is because of at least three, there's many more, kind of central aspects of what remix is and how remix functions. It's reflexive, it reincorporates, it looks back and forward simultaneously. It allows us to kind of take stock of those ways that we want to counter and also those ways that we want to move forward. And it's recombinant. It takes these different elements and puts them back together in new ways. It refigures what's possible by virtue of what we've been left with. Part of the legacy of colonization that we experience in an ongoing way, and I'm thinking of Linda Tuhiwai-Smith, the Maori scholar, and saying this is that one of the deepest parts of the experience of colonization is fragmentation. Our people, our families, our nations have been fragmented and spread across all of Turtle Island, and in many cases have been dispossessed of where we were, right? So part of the finding the way back is about reassembling those pieces. Part of the work of remix and recombination, reclamation, is about bringing those pieces back together. And in that sense, then, that work is deeply political because it is about regeneration. It's about reclamation that serves a political purpose, about the regenerative power of doing this work. So the re's come up a lot in Indigenous media. We are responding, we are reacting. There's a necessary part of that. You know, one of the kind of critiques, obviously, especially of kind of clicktivism, armchair activism, Indigenous mobilizations, and I think broadly political mobilizations that are filtered through the kind of deeply hyper-mediated spaces that we operate in now, is that they're only reactive, this sort of armchair activism that's only in response to. But I guess partly what I'm trying to talk about tonight, and especially filtered through the arts and through media, I see is really a proactive part of that as well. That is about reclamation of the way that we represent ourselves and revision and so on. This is kind of like a continuum, right? This is a continuum of the work that we're trying to do all the way through. And I want to just sort of finish a little bit with a couple of examples of some projects that I think are doing good work in that capacity. Some of them have been mentioned already, the 1491s. How many of you guys know about 1491s? If you haven't, go to YouTube and check out their videos. They're doing amazing work. Kimiwan Zine is a zine out of Saskatchewan, combination of poetry, writing, art, politics. They do a lot of really, really interesting work representing ourselves and our own voices. On the top right corner is the Vancouver Indigenous Media Arts Festival, whose actual tagline can remix, reflect, resonate, remain. Again, taking a lot of representational things and reworking them in new forms and really giving voice and vision to a lot of contemporary Indigenous media makers. In the bottom right corner is a Beat Nation exhibit. You guys know about this exhibit? Beat Nation is an exhibit specifically focusing on art, hip hop, in Indigenous culture and looking at Indigenous culture as a form of hip-hop and vice versa. And again, not strictly in terms of aesthetics, but in terms of a deep understanding of a culture of remix and a culture of our own forms of reappropriation that are about reworking these narratives in the way that I'm talking about. It's been a really popular traveling exhibit. Started as a small show in Vancouver at the Grunt Gallery, has migrated out in Toronto, in Montreal. I think it's going to Halifax next. I'm not sure. It's on the move. If you get a chance to check out the artists that are involved and also with the project, I think it's a really interesting one. In the bottom middle is the Decolonizing Media project, a blog that I started about a year ago, partly in response to the stuff that was happening with Idle No More, partly as a deeply ambivalent, and I'm not going to have time to go into it in detail, way of thinking through what it means to effectively slap a brand on the idea of decolonization, but also as a way of inserting this concept and this idea into public conversation and discourse. So the blog is a Tumblr that we started. It kind of throws a decolonized word and concept onto different things politically that have been happening, photos from the news media, and different other representations as a kind of provocation to think about what that could mean. One of the other things that we've done is a hoodie series. I'm not wearing it right now, but with an embroidered decolonized hoodie, which has been interesting. It's a riff. I mean, the whole thing is kind of riffing on, if you know the work of Barbara Kruger, feminist artist, and then of course reappropriated by the skateboard and streetwear company Supreme. And I wanted to kind of take those and reappropriate it again and flip it back as the idea of decolonize. And everybody that wears the hoodies, myself included in being in New York City for this year, it's interesting to see what the kind of response is and what is generated, because partly it really becomes an invitation to, whether people are offended or provoked or don't understand it, it becomes an invitation to begin a dialogue about some of these issues. And partly I think the political space that's been open now that is a real opportunity for all of us doing this work and for all of you and everyone that you know is about beginning to engage these questions, beginning to have these conversations, beginning to communicate more openly about the deeply colonial reality that is persistent and that we are kind of forced to engage. In the bottom left corner is a site and a project called The Ways. Based in Minnesota. They do a video series, an educational resource series that again, I don't have time to go into in great detail, but I recommend that you check out. And then just in closing, I want to follow with a couple of questions, and they're about accountability. So part of this reflexivity, I think, in the work that we do, and this is kind of following from a conversation I had with Adrian and Jessica last night, and on my own thinking about it, is thinking through what are the stories that we're telling? Who is it that we're reaching? What are we supporting? Also could be kind of how are we helping, like how are we supporting the struggle, and who are we accountable to, and how are we accountable to that? I think Indigenous people, Indigenous media, artists are really in an interesting and potentially kind of unique situation in that our work is always serving these multiple communities and always being held to account in multiple and often conflicting ways. And part of the challenge for us is trying to figure out how to do that in a way that's ethical, that's responsible, and that's really moving things forward. And so I feel like answering these questions or thinking through the ways that we do this through our work, I'm really celebrating a lot of the positive things that are coming out of our community right now, but I also see that there's real challenges in trying to sustain the work that we're doing. And I think partly that's about thinking through how we might consider answers to some of these questions. And I'm going to be the third person of us tonight to talk about Matika Wilbur, which is thinking about, in one way, if we think about accountability, two very contrasting but interesting contemporary projects. One about looking to locate us as vanishing, disappearing Indians being documented from the outside, and one as the presence, continuity, continuum, and resurgence of our people from the inside, which is with Matika's project. I don't know if you guys know about Jimmy Nelson. He's a Dutch photographer, has a project, a giant tome, coffee table book of big photographs called Before They Pass Away, documenting Indigenous peoples all over the world. It's gotten widely lauded and celebrated by a lot of mainstream media as being this incredible neo-Edward Curtis, which he thinks is a great idea. He's also talking in an interview saying, you know, we have to, their treasure is our treasure. What's essential to them is what's essential to all of our humanity. We need to preserve it. We need to document it and preserve it, because once they start using cell phones, the cultures will vanish entirely forever, literally. So by contrast, Matika's project, as other people have explained, and I won't go into it in great detail, is about documenting the 566 federally recognized tribes and others, documenting all of our people, collecting oral histories, representing ourselves on our own terms, not as vanishing, but as present, continuing, and strong people. So all of this is to say, for me, and this photograph and the image that's beside it is from an ongoing protest, but at least the height of a protest that was happening in Elsipogtog First Nation among the Mi'kmaq people in what is known as New Brunswick in Canada. This is in October. A massive amount of RCMP were called in to police what were a very small number of peaceful protesters against fracking in their territory. And I say this because, for me, this is a photograph that was taken by a journalist seconds before the RCMP and the police marched over and started pepper spraying, attacking, and arresting everybody. And this photo got sent out on Twitter, and literally within the same 24-hour cycle, there were countless versions of this that were circulating across social media in various forms. And there is an inseparability and a deep level of integration and interconnection between the art that we make, the media that we produce, and the political struggles that we're involved in. And I think there's a necessary level at which we need to think about those things as part of this ongoing continuum of struggle. And I really thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to the questions. Hi, hi. This is projects that I work on.